Happy Monday and welcome everyone to our May 12th episode of Live with the League. I'm Emily Kalashewski and I am joined today by a few members of our state and federal affairs team. And so before we begin, a couple of housekeeping reminders. Please post your questions for our guests, our Lansing team, in the chat, in the Q&A, or in the comments on the Facebook feed, and we will answer them as best as we can. And links will be provided throughout the show. So if we reference a link, we'll make sure to post that in the chat, either here on Zoom or on Facebook Live, so you can access those resources. All right, we've got a packed agenda today, a lot of topics to touch on. Let's get right into it. Our first topic, the Senate's general government budget and what it means for revenue sharing. John, let's get right into that. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, thanks to everybody for joining us today. Well, we got some good news last week out of the Senate general government budget. But before I explain that, I just want to sort of give that caveat again. This is a first shot across the bow from the Senate. So there's a lot of negotiations that are still to take place. We'll talk more about the budget in general here in a few minutes. But in the Senate's first version of this, Senator Cherry, who chairs the subcommittee on appropriations for general government, included a 10% revenue sharing increase, which is consistent with where he's been in the past as a huge supporter of local government. They also put in a piece on public safety, which is a little bit different than what the House has done around the Public Safety Trust Fund. It's a $100 million pot of money. 60% of that going to county sheriffs and 40% going to cities and villages. And they have a little bit of a formula associated with it that we're still working through to figure out what the exact numbers would be. So while the output may be a little bit different than what the $75 million is in the Public Safety Trust Fund, the impact itself that they're trying to achieve is a little bit more broad-based. So not just on violent crime prevention like you've seen out of the House, but a little bit more in terms of things like, everything from you could use it on police, fire, EMS, to community violence intervention programs, 911, a variety of things. And so a little more broad-based, a little bit different distribution. And that's really going to set up a pretty interesting discussion as we think about the negotiation between the House, the Senate, and the governor, who also in her budget proposed the Public Safety Trust Fund at $75 million. And then the only other piece that I would mention in there that we're watching pretty close from a monetary standpoint is there is this infrastructure fund, which is a little over $300 million. But when you start to dig into that a little bit, you'll notice that it's pulling pieces from other portions of the budget for very specific things. So in that 300 million, there's like $90 million to help MDOT make the federal match. So we draw down the maximum amount of money that's associated with that. And so it's not like it's just a direct pot of money that could be handed out in grants for specific things. It's tied to some specific purposes right now. Although there is a portion of that money that will be ongoing in future years, which may get into a more grants distribution process. So something that we're tracking, well aware of. But overall, a very, very robust budget as it relates to local government investment. The senator talked about that very directly, and then he wrapped all of that by finally mentioning his goal of getting the revenue sharing trust fund done. So I think we will also see that introduced in the Senate here in the near future. And then the timeline on that, once it's introduced, is yet to be determined, but it continues to be a part of the broad budget discussion, which is something that we're really happy about.
So again, as we're seeing that revenue sharing trust fund, the echoes of that continuing to come up, are there any things that we are looking to our members to do? Maybe signing up for that, the form we have for the support, are we still accepting support there?
Yeah, we are absolutely still accepting support there. I know probably many on this call have already done it, but if you haven't, I'm sure we can pop that in the link or in the chat here so you can link to that. And our members just need to keep it on the forefront of their conversations. One, I think it's important to sort of inform their constituents about it, particularly as we think about our budgets right now and some of the flux that we may see this being as a result of things that could be happening both at the state level and quite frankly at the federal level. Ensuring that our residents know how important that revenue sharing is to us And the
Hmm.
idea of getting the state to lock that in to give us a predictable source right now, whether these times become more or less uncertain, we know in the future there's bound to be ebbs and flows in the economy, so that certainty becomes really important.
Sure. All right. We'll get that link posted in the chat. So if you haven't filled out to voice your support for the Revenue Sharing Trust Fund, now is a good time to make sure you do that. And of course, we know it's critical revenue sharing remains strong for local government budgets. Moving right on to the oath of office bills in the House. We've been talking about this over the course of a few Live with the Leagues. Dave, what's the latest on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, oath of office. This is legislation that's a reintro from last session. It's obviously very important to local governments because it deals with when exactly local governments are able to swear in their newly elected officials. So Senate Bills 240 to 243, again, just a reintroduction that the league has taken a position of support on. And basically, what it says is you cannot seat your locally elected officials until the first day following an election. And this really all stems from legislation that was passed to help implement Prop 2 back in 2018, or excuse me, 2022. And as a part of that, one of those bills says that clerks have to account for overseas and military ballots up to 6 days following an election. And because of that, they're created a little bit of a conflict with municipalities that have in their charters. They have to seat them the Monday or Tuesday following that election. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. So really, this is just to give local elected officials or municipalities a bit of leeway from their own charters, if you will. There's no requirement whatsoever that you update or try to amend your charter, but you can do that if you want to. And then anyone who already seats their locally elected officials after that December 1st date, this doesn't impact them at all. So this passed already out of the Senate unanimously. It's currently in House Elections Committee, and we're having some conversations with the chair there on when she might be willing to bring that up.
All right. So maybe some movement there. Another issue I know you've been following really closely is the Recreation Passport Program. For those unfamiliar, can you explain what that is and then what the current debate is on that programming?
Yeah, so this is also one that's been kind of hanging around for a few sessions now. So the recreation passport is kind of that box that you might see when you go to renew your tabs. You can check if you want to participate in it. It's $14, and then you'll get that sticker that basically gets you into all of the state parks around Michigan. There's a little bit of controversy over the past few sessions because legislation has been introduced that basically would take it and make that you have to actively opt out if you don't want to pay that. And that's really where that controversy has stemmed from. The idea there is that it might be a little bit more of a revenue generating thing if you go that route, which would mean more money for obviously our state parks, but also our local parks and trails and waterways and things like that as well. The legislation that has been introduced this session pertaining to recreation passports is taking a bit of a different approach. So Senate Bills 280 and 281 would actually just automatically add that recreation passport fee to your license renewal, to your tab renewal. But in doing so, it would also lower the amount for Michigan residents by about 30%, down from that $14 amount to $10 is what it says in the legislation. But it would also significantly increase the annual and daily passes for non-residents. So the balance there is that you're actually getting more value as an in-state resident. It still actually would project to bring in more revenue overall, and also allow for a little bit of new programming specifically around the water trails. It would create a fund that would earmark 3% of that money to go towards that. For local parks, it would actually up that from the current 10% to 12%, which based on current numbers is somewhere a little north of about $1 million that would be increased for grants to go to local parks. So there is some good in this. The question is going to be whether or not lawmakers agree, if there are enough lawmakers to agree to just automatically mandate that be a component of that renewal process.
All right. And so when might we expect some movement on that? Or still to be determined?
So to be determined still.
Okay.
And we internally also are still kind of having a conversation on whether or not we want to actively get involved on that. There is a coalition of many groups who have interested in this. It's the Progress on Modernizing the Recreation Passport Coalition. And we're also taking a look at that to see if that's something we want to be involved with too.
Thanks, Dave. Great info. Let's pivot now to energy legislation, specifically House Bill 4007 and rules around rice generators. John, what can you tell us?
Yeah. Well, so this is sort of an outgrowth of what we talked a little bit about last week or 2 weeks
Mhm.
ago, where you saw House Republicans make a move to restore local control around the siting of renewable energy projects, particularly wind and solar and battery. Well, when they passed this legislation back in 2023, they came up with a definition of a clean energy system. And unfortunately, these RICE generators or reciprocating internal combustion engines, I had to write that one down to make sure I got that
Right?
right. Um, One, which are not widely used, but
Mhm.
are very specifically used in a portion of the UP, would not fall under that clean energy system definition. So, as they have tried to transition away from a coal-fired plant as that was decommissioned, use natural gas through these RICE generators, they kind of got left out, quite frankly, in the conversation. And so there was a move this last week in the House made to now define these systems as part of a clean energy system. It passed with about 80 votes, which is really, really significant when you think about the fact that the vote to restore local control and the vote to take away local control on siting was both party lines. And so it really sets this up for, I don't want to say probably success. I don't want to be too predictive on this, but I think we are in a situation where people recognize there are some unique needs in the UP as it relates to energy generation. There's a unique solution up there right now that, if it's not allowed to continue as the solution, could be very costly. And those things have been motivating to legislators to say, hey, we need to come up with a fix. You saw that in a bipartisan way. And I think we're hopeful that, we'll continue to throw our support behind this, that the Senate ultimately will find this to be reasonable legislation as well, and ultimately send House Bill 4007 to the governor for his signature.
Excellent. Well, speaking of the Upper Peninsula, we had a few of our team members up there for our UP road trip, which we've been doing a couple of times in the last few years. Can you give us a recap of what they learned?
Yeah, I can regurgitate in some ways what we just heard. So,
Right?
for those of you that probably can tell, my background today is actually in my office. Dave and Emily are also in our Lansing office as well, but so are about 40 of our other closest friends,
Yeah.
as we have a league-wide staff meeting here today. And so we just got the update from Tony and Dan, who spent most of last week traveling the UP with our president and vice president and visiting, communities from Houghton to Negaunee to Escanaba and a few places in between. And it was really meant to be an informal, casual get together to interact with our members. Some breakfasts, lunch, dinners, things like that, to understand what's going on up there, understand what the needs are. And I think what we saw is, one, a little bit of our work in practice. Some of the
Mhm.
things that we need to continue to focus on that are needed up there, much like they're needed in other places across the state as it relates, to resources and services. But ultimately, at the end of the day, a good networking tool for us to make sure that we are interacting with our members in a way that sort of brings us to them rather than them to us, on some occasions. So really productive conversations, and it was coupled by beautiful May weather of 75 degrees in the UP.
Right.
Uh,
You can't beat that.
which you couldn't beat. So really, all in all, a great trip in terms of just engaging and interacting with our members.
Excellent. Well, and that sort of kicks off a busy time, a busy summer for us, and a busy season because we've been on the road otherwise. But first, let's talk about the Mackinac Policy Conference because that's coming up. It's a big event that happens on an annual basis, and we are going to be there. So, walk us through what that means, what you
Yeah.
all do when you're there, and what your goals are.
Yeah, I mean, much like what we just talked about with the UP, it's a lot of networking. And so while we spend a lot of time on this sort of live with the league programming, talking about our legislative efforts and things like that, there's a lot of things that we do that help complement those efforts along the way, whether it's interaction with our members or in this case, the Mackinac Policy Conference, which is put on by the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce. They've been doing it for as long as I can remember. Dave, you may know how far back that goes, but it's several decades, and it is really one of the premier events in the state in terms of getting legislators to attend and participate. We take advantage of that by going up there and having a few select meetings with some very targeted legislators on our key priorities. We utilize that as a way in which to host a reception, to bring in our partners, to gather with them and sort of do so in a more social manner, but it also provides us additional networking opportunities, ways to talk about our priorities, and also exposure, which in this environment is really important right now. And then you come out of there, I don't want to say feeling refreshed, because that's probably the exact opposite thing that happens on the island for some. Um, but really, just coming out of there in a different environment where you're not tied to kind of the bubble of Lansing, so you can have a few more organic conversations. Sometimes they tend to be more honest. I don't mean that in a bad way, but
Right.
as many people know, like having a conversation inside the four walls of your office versus sitting, over an appetizer is a very different environment. And so we utilize that as a way to network, continue to build relationships, and get with our partners as a way to spread our message on our top priorities.
Excellent. So if you were a member and you're going to be there, let us know so we can make sure we run into you. Um,
Seabiscuit at 2:30 on Thursday. You're welcome to join.
Mark your calendar, everyone, if you're going to be there. All right. Speaking of being on the road, I mentioned this is a busy time for us, and we're all over the place. John, you in particular, because you've been presenting to some other groups, the
Wow.
APWA and MPLP. So just make sure we're making sure everybody knows what the acronyms are. Tell us what those are, and how
Yeah.
those presentations went.
So a lot of windshield time,
Yeah.
lately. And so every time around this year, there are two things that I actually really, really look forward to, and I've been doing now for several years. And for APWA, which is the American Public Works Association, have done all 12 of my years here. They have their annual conference, and they ask us to come and give a legislative update. Many of the attendees there are our members, but in the public works space. And so for the individual that has to handle all of our transportation infrastructure policy, it's a great way to get to know those individuals, talk about very specific things with them in terms of like what happens on the ground. But also, much like the last two things we talked about, it's exposure to our members in a different environment and in a way that can also showcase what we're doing organizationally. By comparison, MPLP, which is the Michigan Political Leadership Program, which Emily, both you and I are graduates from, Harrison is also a graduate from. Every year, they take 24 fellows and run them through a several month long intensive on, you know, sort of different political aspects of what you may do as you prepare to potentially run for office. Now, when I did it, I would tell you that it maybe prepared me to understand that I didn't want to run for office. But for somebody in my class like Jocelyn Benson,
Mhm.
just to name drop, right? She knew right away, day one, she wanted to be SOS or Secretary of State. And it was evident right then, back in 2007. And so you see these sort of aspects of it as people get into it. But we every year get to go up to Roscommon and present on local government, both the structure of it, but we talk about revenue sharing, we talk about Headley Proposal A. But honestly, again, you talk about exposure to a different group of people, talking to them about what we do organizationally. So not only when Emily, you and I went through it, did we build good relationships, we're actually building relationships now on an annual basis, some of which
Mhm.
have become legislators, others which have become lobbyists. There's an individual right now that's running for Congress. And so it really helps build our network as well. And so these are great opportunities that we've had to get out, be amongst other people and other partners, and really talk about what we do, how we do that,
Mhm.
and then how we can interact with them on several different levels and occasions. So really proves to be very, very beneficial overall to our advocacy efforts, but also organizationally.
Absolutely. It's great for our collective voice. And I know we have a lot of members who've also been through that program. If you're looking for more information, I know they're always looking for folks to apply. on an annual basis. So MPLP, it's through Michigan State's Institute for Public Policy and Social Research,
Yeah.
IPSR. Okay, I think I might have gotten that one right. So more information is available if you need it, if that sounds interesting to you.
Yeah. Well,
But
and
let's get
I
into
would say this, just a quick like shout out slash congratulations. That program for years has been sustained by fundraising and a variety
yeah,
of other things. I know when I went through it, I was fortunate enough that it was still free to the fellows, which it hasn't been recently, but I do believe it will be once again, as the Balmer Group just came in with a $750,000 grant to make that program work in the future. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about other people's program. That's not the intention here. But it has been a fabulous program, not just for us that have gone through it, but quite frankly, when you talk about sort of the way politics in the state are and the way they are nationally, it is very intentional about bringing people together, having some civility in those conversations, and working through differences. And I do believe that going forward, it's programs like that that will really help sort of stabilize the institutions that we all work with in this space.
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Loved the program. And I will say, I know Tina Demore just posted in the chat. She's from the class of 2014. So thanks for letting us know, Tina. And I will say, if you're an elected official and you participate in that program, I have to believe it's probably worth some elected officials academy credits. So if you're looking for more opportunities, there's another one out there. So check it out. Let's get into our last topic of the day, the budget, because it is just that time, or it's really been that time for the last few months. So first, let's start with the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference that took place recently. John, what's the latest? What can you tell us along those lines?
Yeah, so it is just about to take
Oh,
place.
sorry, it's
Yeah,
happening.
nope, that's okay. I tend not to want to correct, but in this case, it is slightly
Yeah,
important
thank you.
from a timing perspective, just in the sense that this coming Friday, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference, or the CREC, as we call it, is going to be taking place. The last one was in January. Those January numbers have been what the House, Senate, and Governor have been working from to produce their individual budgets right now. But this May CREC will really give them the final numbers to set their targets to work off of. So once those numbers come out, so House fiscal, Senate fiscal, and the Treasury all have to agree on what the revenue projections are. So that means everything from how much sales tax is collected, which impacts the amount of constitutional revenue sharing that is distributed to cities, villages, and townships, all the way to how much income tax they're expecting to be collected, which will identify how much money they have in their general fund. And they'll even talk about cost pressures, which will be really interesting right now as we think about what's going on both with trade and tariffs, what's going on with potential forecasting on government cuts at the federal level, and then how that will all interplay at the end of the day as the House, Senate, and Governor work to negotiate a budget.
So definitely something to keep an eye on. If we're thinking about this sort of from a higher level in terms of the budget, the process, where we're at, where we're going, Dave, what can you remind our members of? What do they need to know as we're maybe moving through towards a conclusion-ish of the budget process?
So we're in the middle of it right now. So the Senate passed their individual departmental budgets out of the full Senate Appropriations Committee last week. They're expected to have a pretty lengthy conversation into the evening on the Senate floor this evening, potentially even passing out their full budget version this week. The House is not expected to necessarily do that. I think they're going to wait until after that Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference John mentioned here that's going to be taking place on Friday. But essentially what they do when they pass the budget separately, they will then vote on each other's budget, zero it out, and then that creates what's called the conference committee, where they will negotiate behind closed doors that final budget version. I will say, for anyone who attended CapCon, you kind of heard us up on stage joking a little bit about, if anyone tells you they know when the budget's going to pass, they're lying to you, because there is a statutory deadline for it to pass by July 1. the speaker has already indicated that that's probably going to be a pretty difficult timeline to adhere to. And so you're really looking for it to extend out until that constitutional requirement for the end of September. So really that's the runway right now. It's anybody's guess whether they're going to get something done by July. But as of right now, the House at least doesn't necessarily seem to be in too much of a hurry.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
John?
I will say in the last couple of years, right?
Mhm.
The differences between the House, the Senate, and the governor's budget have been fairly minimal, right? There have been,
Mhm.
certain aspects that have been drastically different. But I think
Sure.
what you're going to see right now is the House budget, simply because they're going to build in, anticipated revenue reductions, both to fund their transportation funding proposal and a income tax cut, which they have passed, is that these budgets are going to look drastically different, right? And so usually we
Yeah.
talk about points of difference. The points of difference might be everywhere across these budgets, which is going to be kind of fascinating, one, to see, but then two, from both a lobbying and a negotiating perspective, how do you navigate that, right?
Right.
As we've talked about before, this is imperfect science, and you're trying to figure out, well, what direction do I need to go in to give us the best opportunity to be successful on our priorities? And in this case, these sort of drastic differences will make that calculation, not just for us, but really for everybody in this space, a heck of a lot harder.
Sure. A really interesting time to be a fly on the wall, some of those conversations. Questions come through the chat. Is the budget being prepared with anticipation on receiving federal renewable energy money?
Yeah, so the governor's initial budget was reflective of getting all of the federal funds we anticipate. Um, you see, the Senate budget is pretty darn close to that. And we
Mhm.
haven't seen the House budget, and really hard to predict exactly how that's going to look. What I will say is you've seen state departments, particularly the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, recently put out a report about the impact on the state budget as a result of proposed Medicaid cuts at the federal level. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think one of the things that could slow the budget down this year is not actually the fact that there are so many differences between what the House and the Senate are doing. It's actually the unknowns of what the federal government is going to do, and their timeline is different than that statutory July 1 timeline that Dave just mentioned. It's actually a lot closer to our constitutional timeline as of September 30th. And so watching what happens there is going to impact some decisions at the state level, undoubtedly,
Right.
right? I think even if those cuts don't happen in Medicaid, clearly on the federal side, there are some cuts that are taking place, some that are maybe going to take place that we just don't know about yet, that could impact the state budget. And whether that's maybe $1 billion change or a $3 billion change could make a huge difference in the overall structure of how we allocate our resources at the end of the day. Um, so I think in all of our times here, I don't want to quite call it a perfect storm because I don't think that's fair, but you do have sort of these, outstanding pieces that are unpredictable right now that are going to make this as challenging of a budget process as we've seen in a long time.
Fascinating. Like I said, a really interesting time to be in the lobbying world. All right. That's all we've got for updates for you all today. A couple of reminders before we officially close. We have our Community Excellence Award program. We had a couple of special guests on the show last time to talk about their application process and what that was like for them and competing for the ultimate crown cup that is the Community Excellence Award. And so if you have an innovative, thoughtful, interesting project that you want to submit, it's a very easy application process. Those applications are due by May 17th. And if you are an elected official and you signed up for the EOA Core or Advanced Summit, we are looking forward to seeing you in person this weekend in Bay City for those. We are looking forward to seeing you at our next Live with the League, where we'll have updates on all of these things, including CREC, which might be my new favorite acronym. Until then, have a great week, and we will see you next time.